Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 15 of the KMG Show. Before we get into the heavy stuff, that is to say, the end of the world as we know it, I wanted to talk briefly about daylight saving time, which kicked in yesterday. I suppose for me, it's the beginning of the good part of the year when it is light at night, matching the warmer temperatures. Although on the global warming watch, temperatures here in Victoria have been running about 5 degrees Celsius, less than seasonal norms. That's 9 degrees Fahrenheit. It was 40 degrees Fahrenheit at 1 p.m. yesterday, and not much warmer today. But I don't want to go into a Peter Hitchens-like rant against daylight saving time. But I saw last week that Yukon, which is a Canadian territory north of the Arctic Circle, is going to make DST permanent. Well, it is permanent now. There will be no more turning the clock back in November for Yukon. And I thought, well, I used to live in Edmonton, which is pretty far north, not as far north as Yukon, mind. So what will that mean for the morning? Well, I checked, and for the most of the month of December, the sun rises in Whitehorse, which is the capital of Yukon, about 11:09 a.m. And what this means is that the sun will be coming up after noon, after 12 o'clock. Truly darkness at noon in Whitehorse. What could they have been thinking of? Places with the great extremes in sunrise and sunset already suffer from all kinds of neurosis because of this. Elevated suicide rates, and I can only imagine the horror of living in a place where the sun does not come up until after 12 o'clock. But the people of the Yukon, in their wisdom, have decided to just to see what happens, try out this great experiment. Now, back to regularly scheduled programming. As previously said, the end of the world as we know it. Jim Kunstler's column this morning was written before the collapse in the price of oil. Let's see what he has to say. Around the same time that most Americans set their clocks ahead this weekend, something more momentous shoved the world into an epic phase change, and the modern era, with all its mighty baggage, was finally swept away along with that single lost hour of darkness. We're in a new world, and one night later, out on the freeway of history, the engine of the global economy threw a rod. The chauffeur is still standing alongside the stricken vehicle in the breakdown lane, scratching his head while sour-smelling smoke wafts up from the hood. You'd think that this truly earth-shaking events like this might change the so-called narrative, but the New York Times was at it again this morning with this front-page op-ed purporting to explain all the sorrows of our decade. And there's a picture of a front page story, which is an opinion story by someone called Juliette Jacques, who is the author of Trans, a memoir. Transphobia is everywhere in Britain. It's a respectable bigotry on the left as well as the right. And there's a picture of a bunch of not very prepossessing looking people. I don't know, looking angry or happy. It's hard to say. And in the center of the picture, there is, a hideous creature who is wearing a garment the likes of which I've never seen before. Kunstler continues, that's how out of it the narrators are, even while a thuggish reality whapped them repeatedly upside the head with a 2x4 for weeks leading up to this. No, Dean Beckett, New York Times editor-in-chief, transphobia does not explain the quandaries of our time any more than sorcery or the wickedness of black cats explained the plagues of the 1300s that put a chapter of the human story to rest and started a new one. That elaborate machine of globalism just never figured on a situation when so many people in all corners of the world would have to hunker down in place to wait out one of Gaia's super weapons. Lots of things are blowing back on us now, especially from the patches, tweaks, and workarounds we applied to the shuttering system while the check engine light was flashing the past 12 years. After the awesome skid of 2008, you'd think that the world's money managers might have learned something about the hazards of stepping on the gas when those lights were flashing. Sadly, the tens of thousands of PhD economists in the back seat couldn't think of anything else to do. And history will guard them as no better than the hooded priests of the 1300s who swung their smoking censers in the dark streets while the stricken townfolk bundled their dead. Now, as always, caveat lector with Jim Kunstler, as much as I admire him, that he has been talking about the long emergency for, about 15 years now, and there is a tendency for declinists to seize upon the latest news and say, aha, my thesis is vindicated. Perhaps it will be, perhaps it won't be, but the short-term news is not good. The Dow took another thumping today, down over 2,000 points, almost 8%. And the VIX, the Scaredy Cat Index, was up 30%. So, from CNBC, oil plunges 24% for worst day since 1991. Its multi-year low after OPEC deal failure sparks price war. The sell-off in crude began last week when OPEC failed to strike a deal with its allies led by Russia about oil production costs. That, in turn, caused Saudi Arabia to slash its oil prices as it reportedly looks to ramp up production. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude and international benchmark Brent crude on Monday posted their worst day since 1991. WTI plunged almost 25%, more than $10, to settle at $31.13 per barrel. International benchmark Brent crude slid $10.91, or 24%, to settle at $34.36 per barrel. This has turned into a scorched earth approach by Saudi Arabia, in particular, to deal with the problem of chronic overproduction. Again, Capital's John Kilduff said, the Saudis are the lowest cost producer by far. There is a reckoning ahead for all other producers, especially those companies operating in the U.S. shale patch, I'll say. The shale boom is bust. It's definitely bust now. A few years ago, Rex Tillerson, who was the chairman of ExxonMobil, later became Trump's first Secretary of State, he confessed in an interview that his company was losing money hand over fist when oil was at $100 a barrel. Well, if you can't make it work at $100 a barrel, you're certainly not going to make it work at $30 a barrel. And this means not only the end of shale production in the United States, it means an enormous headache for those financial institutions foolish enough to have loaned the many, many, many billions of dollars for this most capital intensive of energy extraction. Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta, my old friend, gave an emergency press conference this morning talking about some sort of Keynesian attempts to goose the Alberta economy. The Alberta economy was already staggering, and I don't know, is this going to be worse than the NEP of the early 1980s? It could be, particularly since Alberta oil was already trading at a tremendous discount because of the lack of pipelines. This is very bad news for not just Alberta, but BC and Saskatchewan. Natural gas prices have fallen uh, precipitously as well. So there's not only bad news for the three westernmost provinces, it is most assuredly bad news for Canada as a whole. People will certainly enjoy the lower oil for heating prices, the lower oil for gas prices. But then there's the question of tax revenues. Oil and gas industries provide a very significant part of Canada's revenues. This has fallen in recent years, and now it's going to hit the floor. And I suppose I've been accused of being a declinist myself, but I have predicted for quite some time that because the only thing holding my country together is inertia, that in the midst of some sort of crisis, economic or political crisis, when the leadership of my country goes to the people and asks for sacrifices, it is going to get the answer, why? Why should we sacrifice anything? The economic crisis is already here. The political crisis, well, that is unfolding because the last election led to a situation where the Conservative Party largely swept Western Canada and was largely shut out of the rest of Canada. This led to a call for Wexit, for Western separation, Alberta separation in particular. And I suspect it's not going to be very long at all before the people of Alberta are going to ask, why do we continue to have to pay an enormous amount of money to keep standards high in Quebec and the Atlantic provinces when we are suffering so much ourselves? So there you have the double whammy of an economic crisis and a political crisis. Also from CNBC, Jim Cramer says he could see 9 or 10 oil companies going bankrupt if crude declines persist. Now, Jim Kunstler has talked about the whipsaw effect that oil has on the economy and the economy on oil. That if when oil is $75 a barrel or more, the economy begins to shut down. When oil is less than $75 a barrel, and now it's at 30, oil production begins to shut down. So we are going to see an enormous contraction in the extraction of oil and of plans for new places for oil to be tapped. It's already extraordinarily expensive to find new sources of oil, given that they are typically offshore now and often far offshore. These projects cost billions of dollars before even a single barrel is extracted, and I suspect that most of these projects are now going to be scrubbed. Of course, that won't last because the world runs on oil. It runs on petroleum products. And eventually, this will lead to shortages, significant shortages. And so we would see the price of oil rebounding to, well, $150 a barrel, maybe $200 a barrel. And then, of course, the economy packs it in. It has also been pointed out that banks, several banks, because of their exposure to the energy sector, are in very serious trouble now. Kunstler mentioned in his column, he made the same observation that Adam Curtis made some years ago, that after the near total collapse of the world economy in 2008, one might have expected some structural changes, but we didn't get that. We got more of the same. More creation of credit, quantitative easing, helicopters dropping money on banks, being instructed that saving is wicked. And of course, there's no money to be made saving anymore because the pitiful amount that your bank pays you is all swept away by inflation and taxation on those tiny gains that you get from investing money now. Well, that ordinary people get from investing money. So how did this most recent crisis come about? Let's see. There was a piece by Tom Luongo in Zero Hedge last week. Russia just told the world no. Yes, there is real power in the world no. In fact, I'd argue that it's the single most powerful word in any language. In the midst of the worst market meltdown in a dozen years, which has as its source problems within global dollar funding markets, Russia found itself in the position to exercise the power of no. Multiple overlapping crises are happening worldwide right now, and they all interlock into a fabric of chaos. Between political instability in Europe, presidential primary shenanigans in the US, coronavirus creating mass hysteria, and Turkey's military adventurism in Syria, which we'll get to later, the Eastern Mediterranean and Libya, markets are finally calling the bluff of central bankers who have been propping up asset prices for years. But at its core, the current crisis stems from the simple truth that those prices around the world are vastly overvalued. Western government and central bank policies have used the power of the dollar to push the world to this state, and that state is, at best, meta-stable. But when this number of shits gets this freaking real, well, meeting the fan was inevitable. And all it took to push a correction into a full-scale panic was the Russians saying no. The reality has been evident in the commodity markets for months. Copper and other industrial metals have all been in slumps while equity markets zoomed higher. Of course, one of the reasons why copper and other industrial metals have been in slumps is because of China. The mining industry has bet heavily on China, that China would need massive amounts of copper, iron ore, and other metals so that they could keep building, I don't know, ghost cities for 1 million people, their own version of Keynesianism. Well, how bad is the Chinese economy? We don't know, because we actually know little about the Chinese economy. The Chinese are economical with the actuality. None of the figures that come out of that country can be trusted. You may have seen the story about a hotel which was commandeered for coronavirus sufferers collapsed over the weekend. And I'm reminded that back in the 1980s, we were told that Japan was going to conquer the world. Oh, because they're better than us there. This rather small collection of islands without any natural resources to speak of was going to conquer the world. We were told that the grounds of the presidential palace, not presidential, the imperial palace in Tokyo was worth more than the entire real estate of the United States of America. And when you hear something like that, you're obviously talking about a bubble. But for, 20 years now, we've been told that the Chinese are going to take over the world. And I've always been suspicious of this, not least because we know very little about their Potemkin village of an economy, but also because of the slapdash nature of that country. We've all seen the videos, a woman walking down a hall in a shopping center, a mall, and the ground opens up and she gets swallowed. She just disappears and everyone else walks by, no one paying any attention. Or perhaps you've seen pictures of Chinese intersections where there appear to be hundreds of wires going in every direction. Doesn't seem to be much interest in safety standards in China, or just not much interest in what you might call due diligence or probity. So perhaps we can start decoupling ourselves from that country, and I'll have more to say about that later. But back to this Zero Hedge article. It was oil that was the most confounding of all. Most of 2019, we saw oil prices behaving oddly as events occurred with regularity to push prices higher, but ultimately see them fall. Since peaking after the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, oil prices have been a one-way trade. Our inept leaders are trying to blame coronavirus as the proximate cause for all of the market's jitters, but that masks the truth. The problems have been there for months, pushed to the back burner by incessant Fed intervention in the dollar funding markets. The 2008 financial crisis was never dealt with, just papered over. The repo crisis of last September never ended. It's still there. And it reappeared with ferocity this week as people sold dollars and bought U.S. treasuries while pushing U.S. yields on the long end of the curve to absurd levels. Credit markets are melting down. And yes, the world runs on credit. What we saw in 2008, what was so horrifying about that was that credit was not being extended, which means that companies could not operate. Stock markets are the tail, credit markets are the dog, and this dog was run over by a bus. The Fed intervenes to keep short-term interest rates from rising to preserve the fiction. It is still in control. The market wants higher rates for short-term access to dollars. The Fed tried to help by cutting rates by 0.5%, but all that did was tell people the Fed was as scared as they were. The selling resumed and gold bounced back to its recent high near $1,690, only to be swatted down on the New York Open this morning. That didn't work either. Now, that's another interesting question. I mentioned last week that my illusions about, gold were shattered a few years ago when, in a series of absolutely preposterous trades in the middle of the night, multi-billion-dollar trades, oil just gets whacked, which told me that our elite has decided that gold will not be allowed to become a rival to paper money, and we will use our power just to keep it down. But how long that power can be extended, well, yeah, I guess we'll see. Into this mess, OPEC tried to save itself by asking for a historic production cut. OPEC needs this cut to remain relevant. The cartel is dying. It's been dying for years, kept on life support by Russia's willingness to trade favors to achieve other geostrategic goals. I've said before that OPEC production cuts are not bullish for oil, just like rate cuts are not inflationary during crisis periods. But finally, Russia said no, and they didn't equivocate. They told everyone they are prepared for lower oil prices. The panic was palpable in the reporting on the meeting. Quote, regarding cuts in production, given today's decision from April 1, no one, neither OPEC countries nor OPEC plus countries, are obliged to lower production. OPEC's Secretary General said the meeting had been adjourned, although consultations would continue. At the end of the day, it was general painful decision of the joint conference to adjourn the meeting. No deal OPEC plus means the 3-year experiment is over. OPEC plus is dead. The Saudis are all in on stabling oil prices, and they may need to do something extraordinary. There comes a point where negotiating with your adversaries ends when someone finally says enough. Russia has been attacked mercilessly by the West for the crime of being Russia, and I've documented nearly every twist and turn of how they have skillfully buttressed their position, waiting for the right moment to get maximum return, to reverse the tables on their tormentors. And to me, this was that perfect moment for them to finally say no to get maximum effect. When dealing with a more powerful enemy, you have to target where they are most vulnerable to inflict the most damage. For the West, that place is in the financial markets. Remember the first basic fact of economics: prices are set at the margin. The only price that matters is the last one recorded. That price sets the cost for the next unit of that good, in this case, a barrel of oil up for sale. In the world of cartelized markets the world over, where prices are set by external actors, it is easy to forget that in the real economy, regardless of your political persuasion, the world is an auction and everything is up for bid. High bid wins. So the most important geostrategic question is, who produces that marginal barrel of oil? For more than 3 years now, President Trump has supported his policy of energy dominance in a quixotic quest for the U.S. to become that supplier. Trillions of dollars have been spent on building up domestic production to their current unsustainable levels. The reason U.S. production rates are unsustainable is because their costs are higher per barrel than the marginal price, especially when all other prices are deflating. Simple, straightforward economics. This is where the Russians' power comes from. Russia is one of the lowest cost producers in the world. Even after paying their taxes to the government, their costs are far lower, close to $20 per barrel break-even point than anyone else in the world when one factors in external costs. When you don't owe anyone anything, you are free to tell them no. Sure, the Saudis produce at similar cash costs to the Russians, but once you factor in its budgetary needs, the numbers aren't even close, as they need something closer to $85 per barrel. They can't tell their people, no, you have to do without, because the populace will revolt. Russia can ride out, if not thrive, in this low-price regime because, 1, the ruble floats to absorb price shocks in dollars. 2, a majority of their oil is now sold in non-dollar currencies, rubles, yuan, euros, etc., to lessen their exposure to capital outflows. 3, the major oil firms have little dollar-denominated debt. 4, low extraction costs. And 5, its primary government budget ebbs and flows with oil prices. All this adds up to Russia holding the whip hand over the global market for oil. Perhaps in the future, historians will wonder about the absurdity of Western, particularly American foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia. So, the United States and the West fought a Cold War against the Soviet Union beginning in 1945. 46 years later, total victory, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Western communism was dead. Hooray! No, it turns out that Russia is just as evil, probably even more evil than it was during the communist days. So Russia must be contained. We must have sanctions against Russia. Some of you will recall that a decade ago, 15 years ago, various people in the West, some of them prominent, were laughing at the prospect of the Russian nation disappearing completely through lack of birth. Ha, 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 ha. Now, why do we still hate the Russians? I'm going to put it down to ethnic factors primarily. I won't say anything more than that. But Russia made it clear, Vladimir Putin made it clear that he wanted good relations with the West. He thought Russia could be useful in containing the menace of Muslim extremism, but we told him to piss up a rope because let's make enemies. It's fun to make enemies, and there couldn't be any possible costs to making an enemy out of Russia. But guess what? We have discovered that there are costs to making enemies. So let's see what's going on if the chat. Ultra Testosterone says, if anyone would be screwed if Corona was bad, it would be New York City. The fact that New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco doesn't have bodies in the streets shows coronavirus is BS. Yeah, I'll talk about that just in a little while. I think that the idea the Yukon has is to hell with it. Let's put it that way. Yeah, maybe. I don't know what they were possibly thinking of. Ricky Bullock says San Francisco is the true test, what with it being an open public toilet and all. The hotspot in the United States is Seattle, Washington. I used to know Seattle fairly well. I went there quite regularly. It was a very nice place to visit, and I suspect it was a very nice place to live. It is no longer so nice in Seattle, because Seattle has decided to take its cues from San Francisco. That, no, we're not going to enforce public order anymore. Why would we want to do that, especially since it's, wait for it, racist? And so Seattle, downtown Seattle, has become increasingly ugly. not a place where nice people like to hang around. Alex Delars says, is KMG still making excuses for Blomp? Oh, we're going to play that game, are we? Blomp, Drump, Orange Man bad. KMG Luke is when Mark Levin, and Savage did radio at the same time. Does KMG understand that Trump won't be reelected? Oh, what, they're going to vote for Joe Biden? I don't really see that. I don't really see that at all. Very nasty comment. Very, very nasty comment. KMG, Trump is bungling the COVID-19 response. No, it's coronavirus or Wuhan. He keeps comparing it to the flu. I don't really think that that's such an unreasonable comparison, frankly. If the coronavirus is only killing people over the age of 60 and primarily over the age of 70, then it is very much like the flu. And as I said last week, these people who have died of the coronavirus, would they have likely died getting the flu as well? Because as Trump keeps pointing out, the great many people, tens of thousands of people in the United States die every year from the effects of influenza. You know, I'm on the fence with regard to coronavirus as to how devastating it's going to be. Of course, you know, we should know in a few weeks whether this, you know, is going to be particularly earth-shaking or not. To the best of my knowledge, there is not a single case that exists on Vancouver Island, where I live. Let's see. Ricky Bullock says Trump's biggest mistake with coronavirus is mentioning the economy in relationship to it. Makes it look like money is all he cares about. Yeah, I've not been particularly happy about that myself. James Fountain says the election is still about 7 months off. That's an eternity in politics, not betting the rent on anyone just yet. You may have seen that Joe Biden, a few days ago in a stump speech, said that he couldn't win, that no one could beat Trump, that Trump was going to be reelected this year. His mind is turned to mush. And now that there's effectively no one else in the race, you know, no one's taking Bernie seriously anymore, all the attention is going to be directed at him. I was alerted to a Pravda-esque story about Joe Biden that appeared in the Washington Post in December, on December 17th. Joe Biden is a healthy, vigorous 77-year-old, his doctor declares. So let's see, he does not use any tobacco products, does not drink any alcohol, works out at least 5 days per week. He had a brain aneurysm 20 years ago. He has a history of atrial fibrillation. Oh, he has never required any medication or electrical treatments, but he does take a blood thinner, over-the-counter medicine for acid reflux and sinus medication. Let's see, he's had various orthopedic injuries. He's nearly 6 feet tall, weighs 178 pounds, with blood pressure of 128/84. His cholesterol reading is 126. Now, here is the money graph. The only test that hasn't been done is the cognitive functioning test, Dr. Olshansky added. But the fact that he's on the campaign trail and meeting a rigorous travel and meeting schedule probably would suffice as a replacement for the formal test for cognitive functioning. He said that cognitive tests are typically not required unless problems are detected. How about an inability to distinguish one's wife from one's sister, or to know what day it is, what state you are in, or what office you are currently seeking? These would count as problems, certainly to me, but all is well with Joe Biden, apparently, and it's just going to get funnier and funnier. They're talking about bets on Trump, against Trump. There was a medical professional, a professor in Britain last week, who said that the good news about coronavirus was that it was going to clear out all the dead wood in hospitals. Yeah, that's right. That's right. One certainly is hearing an undercurrent here that, yeah, it's time that the boomers shuffled off. And since it is mostly boomers and silence who are getting it, well, there's no reason to be so upset. I certainly haven't heard of any young people dying from the disease. But again, it is early days yet. Well, actually, no, that's not true. That's not true because, as I say, we should know. We should know in a few weeks just how bad this is going to be. Here's another story from Zero Hedge. Russia says it can weather $25 oil for up to 10 years. Now that OPEC Plus and OPEC no longer exist, and it's a free-for-all of every oil producer for themselves, and which Goldman described as a return to the playbook of the new oil order, with low-cost producers increasing supply from their spare capacity to force higher-cost producers to reduce output. The key question is just how long can the world's three biggest producers, shale, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, sustain a scorched earth price war that keeps oil prices around $30 or even lower? Well, we hope to get an answer on both Saudi and U.S. shale longevity shortly. And once the market reprices shale junk bonds sharply lower, we expect the U.S. shale patch to soon become a ghost town, as money-losing U.S. producers will not be solvent with oil below $30. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, Rex Tillerson of ExxonMobil said they were losing money at $100 a barrel. So, assuming that millions in supply will soon be pulled from the market, moments ago we got the answer as far as Russia is concerned when its finance ministry said on Monday that the country could weather oil prices of $20 to $30 per barrel for between 6 and 10 years. The ministry said it would tap into the country's national wealth fund to ensure macroeconomic stability if low oil prices linger. As of March 1st, the fund held more than $150 billion, or 9.2% of Russia's gross domestic product. Incidentally, this may explain why over the past 2 years, Putin has been busy dumping U.S. Treasury and hoarding gold. He was saving liquidity for a rainy day, and as millions of shale workers are about to find out today, it's pouring. And again, yes, we made an enemy out of Russia, just because we could. And obviously, nothing could go wrong with that. Putin launches war on U.S. shale. Yeah. Okay, banks with the most energy exposure. I mentioned that earlier. That it appears that there are very serious problems with this new economic order, where, again, it's not so much about what you make, it's more about how much credit you can come up with. And the answer to that question is, as far as credit goes, it appears to be seemingly limitless. A piece by John Carney on Breitbart today. 9 things Trump can do to save the economy from coronavirus. Let's see, federally funded sick leave. Well, most U.S. workers have paid sick leave provided by their employers. Close to 1/3 do not. Many of those without sick leave are lower income hourly or tipped workers. They are less likely to have access to rainy day funds to get them through a period of weeks without income. You may have seen that the Surgeon General of the United States was reduced to begging American employers to let their employees who, are suffering the symptoms of coronavirus or think they might get it, to not have to go to work. Begging. Parents, too, should get federally funded sick leave. Supersize unemployment benefits. In ordinary circumstances, we do not want unemployment benefits to pay too much or to last too long, because that risks disincentivizing the unemployed from seeking work. But it's different now. Small business tax holiday. Small businesses should be allowed to defer tax payments for the duration of the public health crisis. This will provide them with a source of liquidity if sales crash due to a public panic. Payroll tax cuts. A basic income guarantee. Woo. Expand small business loan support, free testing, and affordable treatment. Keep America great. President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign was controversial because he insisted on talking about threats to America and the failures of American policymakers that other politicians and the media ignored, such as immigration and bad trade deals. This is also why it was successful. Trump told us he could see the threats the rest of us could see and would take action to fix things. That's what the American economy and financial markets need today. We elected a president who would set things right. We elected a man of action. It would be a tragedy if the president's advisors convinced him to mimic predecessors who denied the devastation delivered upon America's industrial heartland and laughed at the idea that America needed to be made great again. Governments can be a ballast of cool stability while individuals are justifiably terrified. In other words, governments can be countercyclical in the broadest sense of the term. Joe Weisenthal at Bloomberg wrote in a newsletter Monday. We can't keep America great by ignoring the threat of coronavirus, but if President Trump acts with his characteristic boldness and decisiveness, coronavirus cannot keep us from being great. I'm wondering about the long-term effects of coronavirus. I've already mentioned decoupling from China as one of them. How about the handshake? Are we going to see the disappearance of the handshake? Because, you shake someone's hands and then you have to run to the washroom to wash your hands. Of course, we're all being told not to touch our faces. And as I love to keep saying, what am I supposed to do with my hands then? I remember years ago, I was working in radio, and this was before the internet. And, if you wanted to build up an information bank, you had to cut stories out of newspapers. But when you cut a lot of stories out of newspapers, you get a lot of black ink on your hands. So I was washing my hands dozens of times a day with the result that they started chafing and then they started bleeding. And I wonder if there are people out there who are getting to that point now where they feel the need to wash their hands every 5 minutes or so. Yes, I'm going to be talking about women and what's up with them a little later. Yes, the Wuhan virus. Did you know that you're not supposed to call it the Wuhan virus? Because Chris Hayes, who's on MSNBC, has weighed in on this. Let's see, Chris Hayes is dad to Ryan, David, and Anya. He's the proud husband of Kate Shaw. He's the host of All In with Chris on MSNBC, weeknights at 8 p.m. He's a Cubs fan. Oh, isn't that sweet? The lovable losers from Chicago. So he tweeted, it's just astoundingly gross to call it the Wuhan virus. Do all TV hosts talk like teenage girls now? Or teenage girls from the 1980s? Dr. Paul Gosar, who is a Republican congressman, responded, just astoundingly ignorant to have all major media refer to it as Wuhan virus for months, but somehow today you've decided that's racist. If you think the virus cares about your race, you probably work for or watch MSNBC, Wuhan virus, Wuhan virus, Wuhan virus. So Mike Cernovich tweeted, the media claims it's racist and xenophobic for Congressman Gosar to call coronavirus the Wuhan virus. LOL, these people have no integrity. And he has attached 4 stories from CNN's own Twitter feed. January 24th, the deadly Wuhan virus. January 29th, the deadly Wuhan virus. January 23rd, the rapidly spreading Wuhan virus. January 29th, the Wuhan virus. it seems that the Chinese are exerting pressure. I talked about this last week. They're going on about the revival of the yellow peril and how this is all xenophobic and white supremacist. It seems that this is paying off for them. I wonder how many people, influential people, people in the media, businessmen, academics, politicians in North America have been suborned by the communist Chinese. I suspect it is not a small number. Ned Ryan tweets, anyone who refuses to call this the Wuhan virus or Chinese coronavirus is helping the communists' attempts to rewrite history. Just so. Crisis in Canada. Tim Hortons is scrapping roll up the rim cups due to the coronavirus. Tim Hortons is the epitome of everything that is Canadian, except it's not a Canadian company. It is owned by a Brazilian hedge fund. You talk about Canadian culture. Well, there's hockey, and there's Tim Hortons, double-double, whatever that means. I'm not a coffee drinker. I don't go to Tim Hortons. I used to, buy a donut or two, but then they use frozen dough now. So I'm not going to patronize them. Tim Hortons says it is getting rid of its roll-up-the-rim cups, which is apparently a very big deal in Canada. Apparently there are millions of people that are transfixed with this, or so I keep being told. Due to the coronavirus, and is moving much of the annual contest to its app. The coffee and donut chain is removing all of the contest paper cups over health concerns around staff handling items recently gripped and sipped by customers, returning them to prizes. Tim Hortons does not identify COVID-19 as a catalyst, but says the current public health environment means it's not the right time for team members, aka employees, to collect rolled up tabs that have been in people's mouths. The company says it will redistribute all $30 million worth of prizes to restaurant giveaways and a digital contest. On Friday, Tim Hortons and McDonald's Canada became the latest coffee purveyors to stop accepting reusable mugs brought in by customers amid concerns about the epidemic, with the number of confirmed cases in Canada rising to 57 as of Saturday. The temporary move followed similar decisions by Starbucks and the Second Cup Limited, announced earlier in the week. So, are we going to see as many people going out to eat as we have in the past? I suppose it's become the fashion, especially among millennials, to basically not make any food for yourself ever. To buy all of your food from restaurants and other vendors. Is that going to change? Are we going to see as many people going out to movies, attending sporting events? How are Chinese and other Asian restaurants doing in North America right now? Not well, I would suspect. Oh, LeBron James says, I ain't playing if there are no fans due to coronavirus concerns. Apparently in Europe, we're going to have soccer games played in empty stadiums. It just seems absolutely absurd. But of course, things got so bad in Baltimore a few years ago, when the city was set on fire and the mayor decided just to let it burn out because one wouldn't want to anger, a bunch of arsonists, because, that's not what, mayors do. That the Baltimore Orioles played a home game in a stadium from which the fans had been banned. So there is precedent for this. LeBron James says he ain't playing if there are no fans in the arena. The LA Lakers spoke with reporters after the team's win over the Milwaukee Bucks on Friday at the Staples Center. We play games without the fans? James asked incredulously. Nah, it's impossible. I ain't got the fans in the crowd. That's who I play for. I play for my teammates. I play for the fans. That's what it's all about. If I show up to an arena and there are no fans in there, I ain't playing. They can do what they want to do. I suspect that LeBron is contractually obligated to play, whether there are fans or not. Sports venues across the world are scrambling to implement contingency plans, including the Summer Olympics, which are scheduled to begin on July 24th in Tokyo. Organizers of the upcoming Tokyo Games held a test event on Friday with no fans or top athletes present to test the rock climbing facilities. Nippon Professional Baseball is holding preseason games in empty stadiums, and their soccer league has postponed matches until March 18th. In Italy, the epicenter of the European outbreak, which I believe a quarter of that country is quarantined now, 3 players and a staff member of the Tuscany-based soccer club US Pianese have tested positive for coronavirus. In the US, a CenturyLink Field concessions employee who worked during the XFL Seattle Dragons home game at February 22nd tested positive. Again, I suppose if you don't want to be exposed to random people, going to a place where there are 15,000 of them, or 60, or 80, or 100,000 is probably not a good idea. Baseball season starts in about 3 weeks, and I suppose we will see how many people are in the stands for that. Nothing is shut down. Life and the economy go on. Trump claims the oil price war behind markets crash is good for the consumer because gas prices are coming down, and blames fake coronavirus news for historic drop. The fake news media and their partner, the Democratic Party, is doing everything to inflame the coronavirus situation, the president tweeted Monday. I have no doubt that is true, but the Democrats and the media have decided wickedly to whip up panic over coronavirus, which is the Trump virus, according to them, and he, and not the Chinese, is responsible for it. Trump accused the media of inflaming the virus outbreak and dismissed the collapse in oil prices as a result of Saudi Arabia and Russia arguing. Markets all over the world plummeted Monday over the growing threat of the virus spreading, but Trump has not addressed the economic impact as the coronavirus death toll passed 20 in the U.S. How many people die in the United States every day? Several thousand. So 20 people have died of coronavirus. That's not very many. So last year, 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. It averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year, Trump tweeted. And again, these are good points. Trump administration clashes with airline officials over coronavirus. This is from CNN. Our friend Dave Pinson had a very good idea that Trump helps out the airline companies by paying the airlines to fly illegal immigrants back to their home countries. The U.S. aviation industry and the Trump administration are in a pitched battle over response to the coronavirus pandemic. 3 sources familiar with recent calls between officials from several government agencies and U.S. airlines have told CNN. In a series of contentious conversations, agency officials and aviation executives have clashed over the administration's demand that airlines collect new kinds of data from passengers to help officials track potential virus carriers. Airlines say they can't meet that demand right away, a claim some administration officials say they don't believe. According to several sources who tell CNN, the calls have deteriorated so badly that agency officials have issued threats, spat expletives, and accused airline executives of lying. It is an epic battle, said one source. On one call, the administration official pointed to potential fines if the airlines didn't comply, according to 2 sources. The Federal Register, where proposed rules are published, laid out the new requirements for added data collection and listed penalties that include fines as high as $500,000, as well as jail time of up to 1 year. CDC officials have even threatened recommending that the administration try to ground planes in the U.S. if they can't get the passenger data, according to one source. I'm thinking about the long-term effects of coronavirus on the travel industry in general. I think that cruises are, well, they're finished now, right? I read a piece a few weeks ago which became viral, saying, here's what you've been told about what it's like on a cruise ship. Here's what it's really like. and what it's really like seems dismal. And now, of course, they are disease incubators. So who wants to go on cruises anymore? How about airplane flying generally? I don't fly very often, but last time I flew, uh, two flights in, four flights in, 6 days. The whole experience is already so unpleasant. You have to get to the airport, and they're making you get there earlier and earlier and earlier. And you are essentially treated as a criminal, as well as being gouged. You want how much for a slice of pizza? You want how much for a beer? And then, as I say, the officials all treat you as criminals, are uniformly rude to you. They paw through your belongings. What is this? What is this for? Turn this on. The assumption is, that you're a terrorist. They make you take your shoes off. They certainly made me take my shoes off. And then you are packed into a tiny little space where you are cheated of oxygen. And since 9/11, because of alleged security threats, this has given the staff, what we used to call stewardesses, what flight attendants now. I guess they have the excuse for generally being rude and unhelpful throughout the flight. So why do people? I understand that some people need to fly, but most of us don't. And given how unpleasant the experience is, and now that it is correlated to a deadly pandemic, are we going to see a societal change? Are people going to fly less than they have in the past? I suspect that is quite possible. We've already seen a change, a societal change with regard to automobiles. Until the economic crisis of 2007, 2008, everyone has to have a car. Everyone has to have a car. You would have a household with two parents and two children, and you'd see like 5 cars on the property. But with the millennials, it appears a great many of them have decided that they don't need cars, or more to the point, they can't afford them. The figure that I saw many years ago indicated that keeping a car, operating it, paying for the insurance, gas, repairs, whatever it costs, $1,000 a month. Well, it must be more than that now. So we are seeing fewer people with cars than we used to. Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health compared the coronavirus outbreak to the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the 1980s. Of course, he was involved with that. That's a strange comparison because there was a bait and switch going on with AIDS. We were told it's everyone's disease, and it turned out it was not everyone's disease. It was the disease of male homosexuals. It was the disease of IV drug users. And for a while, for a few years, tragically, it was the disease of wholly innocent people who had been given blood from infected supplies. There were major scandals about this around the world, in France, also in my own country, where unbelievably, the Red Cross sent out blood they knew to be contaminated while they had uncontaminated blood in storage simply to save money. And since this is Canada, nobody went to prison for that, because you wouldn't want dead to rights. They had clean blood. They sent out contaminated blood in order to save money, and there were no prosecutions. Blood services are no longer handled by the Red Cross in my country. A new agency called Canadian Blood Services was formed. That was the only punishment that the Red Cross suffered. From the Daily Mail, seafood trader 67 who smuggled £53 million rather, of rare baby eels from the UK to the Far East avoids jail after lawyer argues he could catch coronavirus behind bars. Gilbert Koo, 67, smuggled millions of baby Alver eels to the Far East. Border Force found 600,000 of the critically endangered species. Most of the rare baby eels were dead. The rest were released back into the wild. So, yeah, we're not gonna, they just don't like putting people in prison in Britain for all sorts of reasons. They're more interested in, people making mean tweets about trans people. My joke of the weekend, it was International Women's Day yesterday, and I hope you had a jolly celebration. Broke mansplaining, woke transplaining. That, oh no, men telling women what's what, that's bad. We're sick of it. Trans men telling actual women what's what. Well, we must listen. Feminism isn't just for the sisters, CISTERS. Get it? You have a bunch of men muscling in and telling actual women what feminism is all about. Typically, the traffic seems to run in the other directions. This has come up in Canada. It's come up in other countries where Chinese immigrants import invasive species to their new countries, which causes havoc with the local ecology. And as I say, let's get that decoupling started. This is from Global News. Chinese mayors may have unwittingly been targets of Chinese influence campaign. When a group of 7 Vancouver area mayors landed in Beijing in April 2007, they believed they were in China to study eco-friendly development and build trade ties for British Columbia. But an investigation by Global News raises questions about whether the Canadian mayors were unwittingly drawn into an influence campaign aimed at improving perceptions of China and reducing criticism of human rights abuses. Billionaire real estate developer and former People's Liberation Army officer Li Zi organized the trip and approached then Port Moody Mayor Joe Trasolini and invited him on the all-expenses-paid trip to Beijing. Trasolini then forwarded invitations to the other mayors. Former North Vancouver Mayor Daryl Musato told Global News. The week-long trip was a whirlwind for the BC mayors, Trasolini said. Why anyone would want to go to Beijing totally escapes me, but a free trip is a free trip. Li Zi arranged many meetings with mayors from towns and cities surrounding Beijing, and they mingled with their counterparts and enjoyed the best of Chinese cuisine. Bat soup, perhaps? Live mice? Musato said a highlight of the trip was the BC delegation's introduction to Beijing Vice Mayor Chen Gang, a senior Chinese Communist Party official. I thought communism was supposed to be bad. Also, remember when we were told that trade, and exposure with democratic capitalist countries, that it was going to transform China? That China's communism could not withstand the cleansing force of free market? How did that work out? Well, it just seems to have made China more powerful. Not more free. The Chinese are significantly less free since they were admitted to the WTO. Did any of the people who made this bold prediction, did they suffer for being outrageously wrong? No, I don't think so. So the communists made a convincing case to the BC mayors that China was taking climate change seriously and doing sustainable real estate development. The delegation also visited a number of Li Zi's buildings in Beijing, Trasolini and Musato said, including Riverside, a mostly unoccupied luxury condo project. There was never any suggestion of anything but good relations between the two countries, China and Canada. And I guess when, you are on an all expenses paid trip, I guess you don't want to appear to be ungrateful. Zhang claimed Trasolini had informed her once that a visitor from the Chinese consulate in Vancouver had asked him not to support Falun Gong, but that Trasolini told Zhang he would not be pressured. Trasolini acknowledged that Su Zhang is correct. As Port Moody mayor, he started supporting Falun Gong starting in 2002, and the Chinese consulate wasn't pleased. Trasolini denied his decision to withdraw support from Falun Gong proclamations after 2007 was connected to influence from Li Zi or the Chinese consulate or Trasolini's participation in the Beijing junket. Yes, I guess it was just a coincidence. According to a profile story in the People's Daily, which is the official news organization of the Chinese Communist Party, Li Zi came to Canada with the intention of using his real estate business to persuade Canadian politicians to view China more favorably. Do you know what drives the real estate market in my province of British Columbia? It's Chinese gangster money, laundered money from Chinese gangster drug dealing. Yeah, that's right. That's what drives real estate in my province, and real estate is about 30 to 40% of the economy. We have all of these condos vacant in Vancouver at a time of a rather severe housing shortage because, it's just an investment. It's a way to launder drug money. Again, I say let the pullback, the decoupling begin. Here's a story which was sent to me. Several years ago, I attended a wedding where I was warned several gangsters were on the guest list. Long story, I was there as a +1, not an invitee. However, what shocked me when I arrived was not the number of convicted criminals at the reception, but that literally half the hall was filled by very high-ranking officers, all of whom I knew by name because of my time on the Toronto court beat. I remember asking my friend, what the hell are these top cops doing in an event with so many guys they probably put behind bars? He responded, one hand washes the other. I didn't get it then, but after Canada legalized weed and the nation's formerly anti-weed top cops all assumed positions at the top of pot companies, things began to become a little clearer. When did Canada become a narco state? Well, I guess it's one business that actually does continue to make money in Canada, although amusingly, the Ontario government announced a few months ago that it actually lost money in its first year of dealing legal weed. Okay, so Delta doesn't seem to think that coronavirus is killing their prices. Prices are up, not down for Italy. That's because capacity has been cut, says Jules Roy. Far fewer flights now. Great Lakes Nationalist says some airlines and hotel chains may go bankrupt, though, if they have faint cash flow for 6 weeks. Ultra Testosterone says Mexico flights are up too in cost. Polygon says Drumpf really is going to win only because DNC is one run by subhumans, women, and psychotic mouth breathers. It'll be a blowout in 2020. Well, of course, coronavirus and the, let's say for now, contraction in the American economy would be a very serious business for Trump if the Democrats had a respectable candidate. They do not have a respectable candidate. And, in my mind, there's a serious question about whether Joe Biden is actually going to be the candidate on, November the 3rd, because he is sundowning fast. And, parties do not go into an election thinking, oh, we're going to lose this one. I remember reading the book, The Making of the President, 1972, that apparently on election day in that year, George McGovern's people were actually believed that they were going to win the election. I mean, you have to think that way. Because if you don't, what's the point of even trying? So, the Democrats, as it becomes obvious even to them that Joe Biden is a disaster, uh, there'll be, there'll be a push to remove him and replace him with someone who's, compos mentis. John Miller says, don't let the China flu distract you from the epidemic of marijuana overdose. Well, it's been decided that smoking tobacco is bad, but smoking marijuana is good. I read years ago that in terms of damage to the lungs, that marijuana smoke is far worse than tobacco smoke. But no, that's not true. That's what we're told now. So marijuana is much stronger than it was in the past. No, that's not true either. Well, anecdotes aren't the same as data, but one hears stories of people having, just a couple of puffs from hydroponically grown pot and just being insensate as a result. So we are going to go now to, oh, yes, Russia fought a war. But I suppose, there's bigger stories out there. Say, trans. Can't get enough of that, and the discrimination, transphobia. That's the real threat. It's the stigmatization. Here's a story from Pepe Escobar, the Asian Times, how Putin saved Europe from an invasion and Erdogan from himself. Once again, it was Russia that prevented the threatened Muslim invasion of Europe advertised by Erdogan. Putin said at the beginning of our meeting, I would like once again to express my sincere condolences over the death of your servicemen in Syria. Unfortunately, as I have already told you during our phone call, nobody, including Syrian troops, had known their whereabouts. This is how a true world leader tells a regional leader to his face to please refrain from positioning his forces as jihadi supporters incognito in the middle of an explosive theater of war. The Putin-Erdogan face-to-face discussion, with only interpreters allowed in the room, lasted 3 hours before another hour with the respective delegations. In the end, it all came down to Putin selling an elegant way for Erdogan to save face in the form of what else? Yet another ceasefire in Idlib, which started at midnight on Thursday, signed in Turkish, Russian, and English, all text having equal legal force. Additionally, on March 15th, joint Turkish-Russian patrolling will start along the M4 highway, implying endless mutating strands of al-Qaeda in Syria won't be allowed to retake it. Once again, I'd like to remind listeners, viewers, that the moderates in Syria who were supporting, they're al-Qaeda. Yeah, that's right. The same people behind 9/11. Those are the good guys that we're supporting. If all this looks like deja vu, that's because it is. Quite a few official photos of the Moscow meeting prominently feature Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, the other two heavyweights in the room apart from both presidents. In the wake of Putin, Lavrov and Shoigu must have read the riot act to Erdogan in no uncertain terms. That's enough. Now behave, please, or else face dire consequences. A predictable feature of the new ceasefire is that both Moscow and Ankara, part of the Astana peace process alongside Tehran, remain committed to maintaining the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Syria. Once again, there's no guarantee that Erdogan will abide. It's crucial to recap the basics. Turkey is deep in financial crisis. Ankara needs cash badly. The lira is collapsing. The Justice and Development Party, AKP, is losing elections. Former Prime Minister and party leader Ahmet Davutoglu, who conceptualized neo-Ottomanism, has left the party and is carving his own political niche. The AKP is mired in internal crisis. Erdogan's response has been to go on the offensive. That's how he reestablishes his aura. Combine Idlib with his maritime pretensions around Cyprus and blackmail pressure on the EU via the inundation of Lesbos and Greece with refugees, and we have Erdogan's trademark modus operandi in full swing. Of course, Erdogan has the number of Turks in Europe are such that they are a significant political force there. Erdogan is interfering in the internal affairs of many European countries, the Netherlands in particular. He is threatening to unleash another wave of migrants on the West. He is trying to drag NATO into a war with Russia over Syria. Isn't it time that Turkey was kicked out of NATO? Of course, NATO shouldn't exist. It no longer has any reason to exist. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for an invasion of Turkey, because everything this country gets up to under this fellow Erdogan is bad news indeed. You know, perhaps Deus Volta will come true, and the Hagia Sophia will once again be a Christian cathedral. Let's see. How does this wrap up here? So in a nutshell, what Erdogan cares about is Idlib, Aleppo, Damascus, Mecca, and not Southwest Asia or Central Asia. He wants to be the second Ataturk. Yet nobody except Islamists sees him this way, and sometimes he shows his anger because of this. His only aim is to beat Ataturk and create an Islamic opposite of Ataturk. And creating that anti-Ataturk would be via Neo-Ottomanism. So, more on that war. From Scott Ritter, who you will remember as an inspector, weapons inspector, during the farcical lead-up to the Western invasion of Iraq in 2003. He writes in RT, new Putin-Erdogan deal is sugarcoating the Turks' surrender. This week's meeting between Putin and Erdogan in Moscow was cast as preventing a war between Russia and Turkey in Syria. War, however, was never on the horizon. Putin called Erdogan's bluff, and the Turk folded. The two, accompanied by their respective senior national advisors, met, and the purpose was to negotiate in terms of a ceasefire, which we just said has come about. Over the course of a week, from February 27th through March 5th, Syria's Idlib province transitioned from being ground zero for a war between the Syrian army and allied forces and heavily armed groups opposed to the rule of Syrian President Bashar Assad into a geopolitical powder keg that threatened to pull the Turkish and Russian militaries into direct conflict with one another. Well, we've seen the video of Turkish soldiers shooting Stinger missiles at Russian planes, and that certainly looks like war to me. So Erdogan's Operation Spring Shield soon fizzled. Not only was the Turkish advance halted in its tracks, but the Syrian army, supported by Hezbollah and pro-Iranian militias, were able to capture much of the territory lost in the earlier fighting. Faced with the choice of either escalating further and directly confronting Russian forces or facing defeat on the battlefield, Erdogan instead flew to Russia. So Georgia, of course, thought that it could drag NATO, well, the United States, into a war with Russia. That didn't work out, did it? You know, and Abkhazia is still independent. You know, I've been reading biography of Stalin by Stephen Kotkin, and Stalin loved Abkhazia. He had a villa constructed in the mountains. Abkhazia is the only subtropical region of Russia, and of course, Stalin was a Georgian. And Abkhazia was one of his favorite places in the world, perhaps his most favorite. So, next up, what the hell is wrong with white women? Horrific video from a woman called Busy Phillips. And this is a childhood nickname, so very busy she was. I keep having to remind myself who this woman is. She's not good looking. Is she a tremendous actress? I don't think so. In any event, she spoke at the Center for Reproductive Rights get-together in Washington last week. Actress Busy Phillips claims she owes her success to an abortion at age 15. The rally, who was there? Oh, Elizabeth Banks was there. She is a good-looking woman who's a good comic actress. Ayanna Pressley, who has alopecia and has stopped wearing a wig. Now, she is a member of the squad. She has been named as a potential Veep choice for Joe Biden. She's very tall. She's a big black woman with no hair and no eyebrows. And I think that's off. I don't think America's ready for that. Rashida Tlaib was there. Busy Phillips insisted that she will never stop talking about her abortion and insisted that having an abortion helped her career. I will not be shamed into being quiet. She's pretty much screaming throughout her entire speech. And she's doing this weird business with her jaw and with her tongue, where her tongue keeps coming out of her mouth and darting back and forth, and her jaw becomes tremendously distended. She said, I will never stop talking about my abortion or my periods or my experiences in childbirth, my episiotomies, my yeast infections, or my ovulation that lines up with the moon. Obviously, a charming companion is Busy Phillips. Oh, let's see. Ayanna Pressley said, we have 2 alleged sexual predators on the bench of the highest court of the land with the power to determine our reproductive freedoms. I still believe Anita Hill, and I still believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. We haven't heard much from Dr. Ford lately, have we? That's curious, because wasn't she supposed to be one of the greatest women in America? No, I mean, no one had heard of her. And she went from a nobody to, greatest woman in America. Then she disappeared. I mean, that doesn't seem right. So Busy Phillips said that she had a hybrid vehicle. Okay, lots of people have hybrid vehicles. But apparently she has a hybrid vehicle because she had an abortion when she was 15. So hybrid vehicle, better than baby. And she had a talk show, which I don't believe she has anymore. But essentially, it was having an abortion that opened up the wonderful world. There's very much cause and effect, I read about this woman that the pregnancy, which led to the abortion, was the result of rape. However, she did not know it was rape until decades after it occurred. What the hell does that mean? How is that possible? Because the term date rape, say, has been in general circulation since the 1980s. So she had sex with a man, and afterwards she decided that it was a bad idea, or it was a bad experience, or she didn't enjoy it, or it led to negative consequences. So that means it's rape. Okay. I could say that this, grossly devalues actual rape, but apparently that's a controversial comment to make. Topless women protest climate rape in London on International Women's Day. Most women should probably keep their clothes on. Most men as well, certainly. They managed to find in this story, this Getty Images story, the woman in the middle is quite attractive. Other women, not so much. A group of 31 women formed a topless human chain in London to protest against climate change on International Women's Day. Members of the climate change alarmist group Extinction Rebellion took off their shirts on Waterloo Bridge, blocking traffic in a protest against the supposedly disparate impact that climate change has on women. Oh, just shut up. Greta Thunberg was talking about climate justice for women, or is it climate justice? You see, the rich enjoy the same weather or suffer with the same weather as the poor. And women get exactly the same weather as men do. But no, of course, women suffer the most because of climate. Well, of course they would. I mean, why wouldn't they? But, as anyone who's ever shared a house or an office with a woman will know, Women prefer the temperature to be, I've seen studies on this, 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than men do. I've worked in an office where, oh my God, it's freezing in here, and the men say, no, it isn't freezing, and then you have these battles over the thermostat, which often results in the thermostat being locked, and people moaning about that, or if you're sharing a house with the woman, that it's like a sauna in here. No, don't touch that thermostat. I'm finally comfortable. This sort of thing. So one would think that a warmer climate would be approved by women. That would give them something to look forward to, but apparently not. A former teacher who took part in the protest, Sarah Mintram, explained the rationale behind the topless protest, saying it's mainly women in poorer countries in the global south that are experiencing the increase in violence. What violence? What, weather violence? Is the wind seeking out women in order to flatten them on the street? Is that the idea? Are hurricanes and tsunamis, are they sex specific? Are they sexualized now? Are they seeking only female victims? We are here to raise the alarm about what is happening to our sisters around the world and to tell women in the UK that climate and ecological emergency is your issue. It will affect you as a woman if we do not persuade our government to take urgent action starting now. How exactly does it affect them as a woman? Extinction Rebellion cited a January 2020 report from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which claimed that climate change was responsible for violence against women in the Southern Hemisphere. Username available. The group was mocked on social media, however, by people who thought their protest diminished International Women's Day, which I will point out is a communist holiday, with one user writing, "You reduce Women's Day to a farce." And of course, this gives news organizations a opportunity to run pictures of half-naked women. Again, yeah, most people should not be naked, men and women. Best to keep their clothing on, or simply, to remove it in private, so the rest of us don't have to suffer aesthetic damage. The climate change protest group has plagued London's Metropolitan Police Service for years, costing the capital's police an estimated £37 million last year alone. The cost associated with policing Extinction Rebellion was more than double the annual budget for the Violent Crime Task Force, which is only £15 million. So how is it they get police protection, but when some supposed, extreme right-winger, or, someone who believes in free speech, oh no, we're going to have to charge you out of pocket many thousands of dollars? Why does Extinction Rebellion, given that they are lawbreakers, gluing themselves to tube trains, blocking, trains from leaving the station and all that, creating chaos in London, regularly stopping people from getting to work. But no, they get free police protection. So, so I assembled a bunch of stories on the subject of women and what's gone wrong with them, white women in particular. I suppose I'm mostly talking about, AWFL, affluent white female liberals here, but that's an awful lot of women, actually. And so we have a story about an actress who I'd never heard of before. She's on a show called Orange is the New Black. Is that still on the air? It can't still be on the air, could it? In any event, Orange is the New Black star Yale Stone recently returned to Australia over concerns about the carbon footprint she was creating by traveling to the US to work. And on Sunday, the 35-year-old actress broke down in tears after being asked a question about climate change at the All About Women festival held at the Sydney Opera House. Yale has a 1-year-old daughter, P. Mao Stone Bancroft, but said she may not have had a child if she had known about the climate impact and the uncertain future they would be born into. She would be born into. And there's a picture of this actress who is not a very prepossessing looking woman. I'm really, really glad I didn't know what I know now about climate change, because I don't know if she'd be here. Wow. I'm not looking forward to when this poor child gets a hold of this story, or she's told at school that your mother nearly aborted you because of climate change. Boundaries, people. Why are you saying these things which are, going to be grossly humiliating to your children? An audience member then asked if it was morally correct to have children because of the uncertain future posed by climate change. This is, who you're going to go to. An actress, a person who is phony for a living. That's who you're going to go to for advice. Beginning to cry, Yale said, "It's really overwhelming. I'm terrified, but I have to use the anxiety I feel to act. I do totally hear your question, and I would love to have another kid. It's hard." And so then we see a picture of her with the distended belly, and she's wearing a baseball cap with the woman's symbol on it. So she got, maximum visibility over the fact that she got pregnant. And the way these Hollywood people carry on, it's as if no one has ever had a child before them, that their child is so very, very special. So, I'm going to put roughly 1,000 pictures of myself being pregnant on Instagram, and then I guess thousands of pictures of me breastfeeding or pumping, or with that plus-size model, Ashley Graham, wiping her baby's bottom in the aisle of a Staples. Let's have that on Instagram as well. In January, Yale made a stand against climate change by returning from the U.S. to Australia in order to cut carbon emissions from flying often between the countries. She had established a home in both countries after obtaining a U.S. green card, but said she could no longer justify her actions in light of Australia's bushfire crisis. Oh, I see. So climate change is responsible for the bushfire crisis. I know people have said that, but it's absolutely preposterous. In a video posted to Instagram, of course it was posted to Instagram, she said it's not environmentally ethical to build a life across 2 continents. Okay, so this answers my question. The actress is best known for playing Lorna Morello on the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, which came to an end last year. Yeah. Okay. New York Times writer who dated Lady Gaga's boyfriend admits it's funny to see them together because the star is so in a different league, as she reveals why their romance has been amazing for her. You remember I was saying last week that it's women who decide what the news stories are going to be? How is this a story? So this woman went out with a man for close to a decade, and they broke up. And so now this man is dating Lady Gaga. And again, this is a news story. This story was first reported, a couple of weeks ago, February 27th. But now it just keeps on going. And she's being, this woman, Lindsay Krause, is now being interviewed on television. She's a celebrity because her ex-boyfriend is dating Lady Gaga. At the time, after her New York Times essay on this momentous event, I wrote, your ex-boyfriend might be gay. Some questions to ask. Did he have a penchant for Cher, Barbra Streisand, Maria Callas, Judy Garland, Liza Minnelli, or Marilyn Monroe? Did he use the word fierce unironically? Did he iron his jeans or t-shirts? Was he a vigilant moisturizer? Lady Gaga, everyone's sick of her, right? She can't sell out concerts anymore. I've seen pictures of her when she has not made herself look like a freak. She's actually a rather attractive looking woman. Here's to continuing to shape a future that has equality for all genders. 13 Reasons Why star Catherine Langford shares an emotional message on International Women's Day. She's best known for a career-defining role in the critically acclaimed Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. And on Monday, rising star Catherine Langford decided to make a stand for International Women's Day and champion equality for all genders. Over the past couple of years, especially working in an industry that acknowledges its inequality, I've been lucky to learn and benefit from the changes other women have made before me. The 23-year-old began, wait for it, an Instagram post. And I'm looking at a picture of this young woman. She's a very attractive young woman, I must say. However, this show, 13 Reasons Why, is a show that glorifies teen suicide. It is grossly irresponsible. So I have no interest in what this woman might have to say on the subject of gender, that is to say, sexual relations, or anything else. And by the way, there are still, there are three genders. There is male, female, and nuisance. So, yeah, okay. Oh, yes, Elizabeth Warren. She dropped out of the race, and apparently a lot of women took it hard, They took it very hard indeed. Apparently you have to be twice as good as a man to succeed. Or as that Mara Gay from the New York Times might say, you have to be 2 million times as good as a man to succeed. So a woman called Sarah Smarsh, that's an odd name, lousy Smarsh weather. She's the author of the memoir Heartland and host of the podcast The Homecomers. And again, this is in the New York Times. And the New York Times has a very strange idea of what constitutes news. Apparently, news is women and their emotional incontinence. That is news. Now, here's how it begins. Consider every moment since the dawn of women, when a female aspired but to no avail. She asked to attend school but was denied. She raised her hand but wasn't called on. She applied but wasn't hired. She enlisted but wasn't deployed. She created but wasn't credited. She ran but wasn't elected. Imagine the sadness and frustration of every such instance as a spark. Their combined energy, the size of many suns. That is the measure of grief and fury I felt rise inside me as I watched Elizabeth Warren's bid for the Democratic nomination wane. When Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, it hurt in similar ways, but didn't surprise me. Out here in the red hinterlands, it was plain to some of us that centrist ideas did not excite in times of historic inequality. This election, though, I thought Senator Elizabeth Warren, a class revolutionary to match the moment, might go to the White House. It turns out she won't even go to the general election. Now the same pundits who in 2016 proved they know very little will list the reasons without realizing they're among the reasons. Such yapping is forgettable, but one bit of political analysis from this election has stayed with me. It was March 2019, about a month after Ms. Warren had entered the race, and my father and maternal grandmother were talking politics at my kitchen table in Kansas. This is the best chance that a woman has ever had to become president, said my dad, a white 60-something construction worker who has identified as a Democratic socialist since Bernie Sanders' 2016 candidacy. Now, it's now. 10 years from now, said my grandma, a white, boo, white people, boo, 70-something retiree who grew up in poverty and spent decades on the farm where I grew up. No, it's now, Dad replied. Hey, I'm game, Grandma said. Yeah, this is news. They cannot do it wrong, and I believe that Elizabeth Warren is the chance, he said, tapping his finger on the table. I had hit record on my cell phone. Sorry, I had hit record on my cell phone. The year-old audio's rambunctious sound indicates that alcohol was involved. Okay, so a drunken political argument. That's news now. If Elizabeth would get the nomination, Grandma said, I would bust my ass if I had to crawl down the sidewalk to get to the neighbors. Vote for Elizabeth. I would too, Dad said. This is exactly what it's going to take to make it happen. I hope so. What breaks my heart about this exchange is that my grandmother deep down never really believed Ms. Warren or any other woman would get the nomination. Maybe that's because she had watched cable news repeat a self-fulfilling prophecy about electability. Maybe it's because, as a woman who has seen so much, she knew that electability was a valid concern. Or maybe it's because it hurts so dang much to let yourself harbor a dream that you might not see come true. Whatever her motivation, you know what? Grandma was right. And it goes on for, I don't know, another 500 words. It concludes thus. A few nights before the Super Tuesday primaries that ultimately squashed Ms. Warren's chances, I had a dream that I was in a crowd watching her on stage. She glowed like someone who has won in a way that has nothing to do with numbers. We spoke afterward. She was clearly at peace with whatever happened in the election. Ms. Warren might not be bound for the presidency, but she has apparently lodged herself in another powerful place, the female psyche. The countless little girls with whom she famously pinky swore that women should run for president will remember. If this supposed democracy is worth lasting, at least one of them won't be denied. What is this woman saying? That she's just gonna, the United States can just become, it can become a dictatorship. To hell with it. If they're not gonna make a woman president, then what is the point? So, I've got one final bit of data here. Some woman, I believe is it a woman? I'm assuming it's a woman, called Tristan. My boy turned 7 today, and all he wanted was a makeup palette. And there's a video of this kid whose life is ruined already, getting all excited as his mother is showing him the makeup palette that she bought for him. And so there was a reaction to this. A Martian Orthodox said, you're part of the brigade trying to elevate anything goes to destroy healthy norms, and we're telling you to go pound sand. Someone named Francis Quinzel said, the toxic masculinity in these comments, yikes. Please don't have kids unless you're willing to love and support them no matter what. My idea of love and support does not include Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Toxic masculinity, eh? Ours is a society that hates boys so much that their mothers are incentivized to turn them into girls. To turn them into girls through drag, to turn them into girls through puberty blockers, followed by surgery. Look at me. That's what these women are saying. All of the women that I have quoted, look at me. Now, of course, women have always been attention seekers, some more than others, certainly more so than men, for the most part. But now, social media, it used to be that women had to be concerned with competition only from people within their set. I don't know, the people at work, their family, their friends. Now social media has resulted in a situation where they have to, or so they believe, compete with the whole world. And so what are you going to do? Well, I suppose if you're good looking or sexy or consider yourself to be, then, you can take selfies of yourself and put them on Instagram and just take that. Yeah, you're not as hot as me, but what if you aren't? Well, I suppose you could talk about how you are saving the world, or you can talk about your agony, and increasingly the agony. What about all this emotional labor that is not being compensated? When am I going to be compensated for my emotional labor? Come on, get with it, politicians. Also tired. Just how very tired you are. Just how exhausted you are. Well, how could you be exhausted and spend all this time writing Twitter messages and Instagram messages? It seemed to me that people who were truly exhausted and or depressed wouldn't do that. They would just, binge watch on Netflix, say. Let's talk about disabilities. Uh, a lot of these women that I quoted are millennial women, and I've noticed that they love self-diagnosing themselves with various physical and mental disorders, which they then tell the whole world about. Oh, I'm autistic. Really? You are? You've been tested for that? No, you just know that you are. Oh, that you're ADHD. Yeah, that's such a that is such a wide term. It essentially doesn't mean anything. Or people saying that they're bipolar. Whoa, it's a pretty serious condition. What, are you being treated for that? No, you're not. Really? You're suffering from PTSD. Were you in the armed forces? No? Were you perhaps a firefighter? How about an emergency medical technician? You've seen a lot of dead or mutilated bodies. Were you a nurse? Maybe? No? It was just sort of everyday life that gave you PTSD? Then I'm going to suggest that PTSD is, again, it's meaningless. But I discovered last week that there is CPTSD, I believe, complex PTSD, because there was this woman carrying on about equality, justice, toxic masculinity, and you bad men. I believe it was bad white people. This is a white woman herself, a Jewish white woman, who was boasting of having CPTSD. And complex PTSD means PTSD from more than one source. Oh, yes, I see you have PTSD. Well, I'm going to one-up you there because I have CPTSD. Yeah, take that. So you have a deficiency. Okay. Why are you boasting about that? Well, I suppose it gives you an excuse to talk about yourselves. So what's happened with white women? Well, I'm going to suggest that women are going through a crisis now because what is their purpose? Because childbirth now it's take it or leave it. It's no longer an assumption that all women will have children, and certainly no longer an assumption that all women will raise their children. Because, a woman staying at home to raise her children is the enemy of the GDP. And, we can't have that. And strangers can look after your children just as well as family members can. So what about men? You going to find a man? Well, you got to find a man that's, up to your standards. Oh, well, you have particularly high standards. Why would that be? Are you a great beauty? Are you notably sexually attractive? Are you famous, perhaps? Are you a talented musician, say? You play the piano or the violin at concert level, something like that? No, you're just an ordinary woman, but you have extraordinary high standards in men. So what, you're going to run through a whole bunch of them? Dozens of them? Searching for Mr. Right there, and Mr. Right has no interest in you because he has sussed what the situation is. And then what? You're going to get into your 30s and you start wondering about that biological clock ticking, and you start wondering about the fact that you've never been married. And then, you get to be close to 40, and then you start panicking, and you start to think that you're going to find some hapless man and settle for him. I mean, it all sounds pretty grim. People complain, women complain about, the shackles that were put on women in the past. And, I suppose that's true to a certain extent. But people like the idea of stability. People like to know what one is supposed to do. It makes life so much easier, and that stability has vanished now. And social media. Social media was invented to drive women insane, and it is doing a very good job of it. So, yeah, let the whole world know that what your 6 or 7 year old son got makeup for his birthday. And I hope you're homeschooling little guy, because I don't think it's going to be very pleasant for him at school the next day. But this will give you an opportunity, Mom, to become an anti-bullying champion. But you could have avoided the whole subject simply by not announcing to the entire world that your 7 year old son wears makeup. This would have required, a little discipline on your part just to keep, private things private. No, but we can't have that. We can't restrain, a woman's expression anymore. YT says men have been and remain insufferable, but it's easier to bitch about women. Okay. No, I think my complaints are justified. That there are things that should not be told to the entire world. And again, failure is not an attribute, or disability is not an attribute. And see, this behavior, it makes actual closeness more difficult. It makes actual friendship more difficult. Because if you're going to tell the whole world, every intimate detail of your life, then, these confessions aren't worth anything. And if there is a poor mouthing competition, then this suggests the possibility that a great many people are lying. Because do you want to be the person to say, actually, my childhood was pretty happy. I got two parents, and, they loved and supported me. And I can't say that I've ever suffered, from any particular kind of deprivation. Well, how boring that must be. And so I guess you're going to have to invent something. A visionary companion says, what are we to make of white women who look up to Tarana Burke as a representative of womanhood? I don't know that I've heard that name. Just let me look this up here. Oh, is a civil rights activist from the Bronx who founded the Me Too movement. Isn't she trying to monetize this? In 2006, Burke began using the phrase Me Too on social media to raise awareness of the pervasiveness of sexual abuse and assault in society. In 2017, Me Too went viral as a hashtag after women began using it to tweet about the Harvey Weinstein sexual abuse allegations. The phrase and hashtag quickly developed into a broad-based and eventually international movement. Time magazine named Burke among a group of other prominent activists dubbed the Silence Breakers as Time Person of the Year for 2017. And Burke represents at public speaking events across the country and is currently Senior Director at Girls for Gender Equity in Brooklyn. Girls for Gender Equity is a Brooklyn-based, of course it is, intergenerational nonprofit organization dedicated to strengthening local communities by creating opportunities for young women and girls to live self-determined lives. Children are not capable of living self-determined lives, but let's leave that aside. To achieve this goal, GGE practices a biopsychosocial cultural approach to tackling the many obstacles young women and girls face, such as sexism, racial inequality, homophobia, transphobia, and sexual harassment. So it's a grift. And, it's good to see that Tarana Burke is getting paid. As Patti Smith once said, the only way to sell is out. So what else is happening on the chat? Broad-based. Yeah, I'd say Me Too was broad-based. LOL. Me Too in Hollywood has a really serious problem, which is the casting couch. The casting couch has been around for as long as Hollywood has been around. And there are a great many actresses, including many. There's one name associated with Me Too, and I'm not going to mention that name for legal reasons, but she got a role, in a movie that made her career because she slept with Harvey Weinstein. And I know that sounds horrible. That's a terrible price to pay. But why would women in Hollywood be lecturing us on sexual morality, given that they indulge to a large extent in something very close to prostitution? And that's leaving aside the whole yachting industry. Ricky Bullock says one of Disney's resorts removed a marquee that referenced the casting couch. Well, well, well. I didn't know about that. Eternal Fisherman says Burke is beautiful. Perhaps she's beautiful on the inside, and beauty is only skin deep. No, actually, that's not true. No, it is not true. Beauty is not skin deep. That good-looking people tend to be better people because they, ugly people are not treated well by the world as a rule. And one of the things that we've seen with feminism is the revenge of ugly women. Men are not allowed to compliment women on their looks anymore, and you get into very serious trouble. You can lose your job for this. And I suppose, this makes the ugly women happy. And I suppose, it's another sign of the secular democracy gone wild. This phrase that I coined, excess of secular democracy. Again, if you look at the fashion industry, if you look at the makeup industry, the hair care products, skincare products, essentially they're selling the idea of aspiration, that you can turn yourself into a beautiful person. Well, that's what they used to do. But of course, beauty is a gift of God, and it is greatly resented by Democrats. I noticed, I guess it was about 20 years ago that fashion magazines stopped putting models on the cover. And again, this is this excess of secular democracy. That, we don't want to offend people by putting, beautiful women on the cover anymore. We're going to put ordinary people on the cover. Or we're going to put Sarah Jessica Parker on the cover. I mean, come on. Sarah Jessica Parker? Really? She's a really unfortunate looking woman. But really, if you look at all the attention paid to Jennifer Aniston, I understand why this is the case. A woman explained this to me some years ago, that she's not like those other women, meaning she's not like the beautiful women. I think that, like maybe, I could be Jennifer Aniston. See, Jennifer Aniston became, the most famous woman in the world because other women looked at her and decided that she wasn't a threat. I've noticed this with Hollywood, that Hollywood is supposedly, for beautiful people, but there, and throughout Hollywood's history, there have not been very many truly beautiful women in Hollywood. Again, because it's an offense to democracy. Someone like Grace Kelly, say, was not typical. She was very much against the norm, because you look at Grace Kelly, a woman looks at Grace Kelly, no, I could never look like that. No, this woman is far, far above me. But you're not going to see, Grace Kelly spoke in she was Philadelphia Irish, but she'd learned to to speak in a very elegant fashion, which again is off-putting to audiences. Now, you look at actresses in movies right through to the 1950s, and you see that they are not speaking, unless it's a kind of a genre drama. They are not using demotic speech. Their speech is far more actressy. There's not a lot of dropped G's and the like, but it was decided that who is the hell is KMG to judge other people's looks? Well, why not me? Why not, indeed? YP says the most beautiful woman is Kate Blanchett. She is indeed a beautiful woman. I remember seeing The Talented Mr. Ripley, where she falls in love with Ripley. She's really barking up the wrong tree there. And she's, so sad in that. And it was just heartbreaking to see a beautiful woman like that. So sad. Well, I'm going to wrap up the show now. The world has not yet come to an end. And if the world is still around tomorrow, then I will be back on the air at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. If you enjoyed the show or any parts of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to support the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Have a good evening. I'll be back tomorrow.